Scratch is without a doubt the best boy in all of Baldur's Gate 3. But today, we put him through every challenge on the battlefields of Baldur's Gate, including Scratch's abusive owner, Lorrakan, Cazador, Viconia, Gortash, Raphael, Orin, and the Netherbrain. Scratch is the only creature I can control that can deal damage to enemies. This doesn't include creatures that I don't control, and if my characters are confused. This would require some difficult strategies and a shit ton of reloads. Scratch has been successful in dealing with the lesser enemies of the first two acts, but will that be enough to conquer this challenge and take on all of the major bosses of Act 3? Please consider subscribing and liking the video, as I'm also working on a solo honor mode challenge that involves no healing. This will be coming out sometime soon. Hope you enjoy. After reaching Act 3, we needed to do a few things. The first was to complete any starting quest and get any experience award that doesn't involve any killing. We accepted the quest from the Gur hunters to hunt down Cazador's Czar, who was added to Scratch's hit list. We also did some small fights against lone mind flayers and weak enemies before we set our sights on the real first target on the hit list, his brutal owner. She was very unkind to dogs, so we decided to let Scratch have his vengeance on her. We confronted her, but had a slight mix-up and accidentally summoned Scratch before the combat started. This caused Scratch to just not join the combat. On the second try, it worked, and we immediately paralyzed her. Scratch easily bit her to death, and we free the other dogs. Our first boss is defeated. After we read the bloodied note to get the quest to investigate the murders, we headed into the city, making sure not to talk to Mizora after talking to Gortash. On the way, we stole the 2 rune powder barrels and rune powder bomb from the Iron Hand gnomes. We entered the Stormshore Tabernacle and stole the Amulet of Devotion for the Scratch Urge to increase his spell save DC up to 20, which is never possible without items. We needed to kill Delore and stop him from killing his first victim, as well as fleeing from the crime scene. Thanks to my massive spell save DC, however, Delore was unable to resist any of my spells, and we feared, paralyzed, and had Scratch kill him very quickly, before he even got a turn. This note on his body allowed us to access into the murder tribunal, but we couldn't enter it just yet. Because I hadn't killed Isobel, I needed to kill some of the targets on the murder list to gain favor from sarevok anchev. No problem, as Chef Rovir was just chilling in his kitchen nearby, and I placed a smoke powder bomb next to him. Scratch bit the bomb, and he and the chef was killed from the explosion. We grabbed his hand and entered the murder tribunal. We were granted access to the tribunal, and because we killed Cora as well, we could just avoid the skill check. We proceeded to the abattoir, but this was different. This time I had to kill Investigator Valeria. Not because she's annoying or anything like that, but you'll find out later. I hastened Scratch and activated the Falar Aloof Shriek aura, and began killing Valeria. At first, I wanted to give her a chance to fight back, so I lockpicked the chains and... So we tried it again, and killed Valeria to become an unholy assassin of Baal. Why did we do this? Well, the item that makes any of these boss fights at all possible is the item the Echo of Abazigal sells, the Ballast Armor. This armor grants an aura that doubles all piercing damage to hostile creatures within 5 feet of the wearer, who we chose to be Astarion. We were also given the Amulet of Baal to confront Orin, but she isn't for a while. We said our goodbyes to Sarevok and headed over to Sorcerer's Sundries for some much needed items. We tell off the lorrakan and jump down the tower to the lower levels. With the help of a See Invisibility scroll, we find the Weave button down to the floor below and claim Marco Heshkir and the Robe of the Weave. These 2 items are massive for us, as it increases the Scratch Urge's spell save DC to 22. We descend into the Sorcerer's Vaults and claim the magic books in it, the most important being the Tharkiate Codex. Because I had access to Remove Curse, I was able to remove the curse that the book granted and get 20 temporary hit points per long rest. This also brought us to level 10. Level 10 was massive for all of my party members, getting Planar Binding for the Scratch Urge and Shadowheart, and giving half my Arcane Ward charges back every short rest. We told Dame Aelin about lorrakan and ran over to confront him with her. We opened the fight very good, with a Dominate person on the lorrakan and a Planar Binding on the Water Elemental. What's important about these 2 spells is that the target, unless they take damage, doesn't get to repeat a save. We have Scratch getting as much damage as possible, and lorrakan and Aelin start dishing out major damage to the others. We activate Falar Luve's Shriek for more damage. Our Arcane Ward allowed us to take very little damage, and the others were absolutely no threat to Scratch and our allies. For some reason, Lorrakan decided to jump down to the floor below and fall prone. The last Myrmidon fell, and we quickly ended the concentration on the others, who were easily vanquished by Scratch and Aelin. That's the lorrakan down, with 6 more to go. Our next set of allies was the Iron Hand Gnomes, so we descended into the Iron Throne to rescue the Gondian hostages. Well, some of them, because we can't fight the Sahuagin. We helped the Gondians before turning Red Hammer over to the Wave Servants of Umberlee. We pressed on to the Steel Watch Foundry and let Xanartubin die, so we could use Speak with Dead on his corpse to obtain the code necessary to destroy the Steel Watch. The fight with the upstairs Bay Knights also showcases how truly viable this build is, having so much spell save DC that enemies almost always fail against being dominated or confused, even with advantage. Not only makes it easier, but also makes it not take a very long time. However, I began to wonder if they knew what we were doing, as the dominated Overseer used Blight on herself to break out of the spell. With our party fully rested, the Scratch Urge proceeded through the lower levels of the Foundry with 2 invisibility potions. We made it to the Neurociter, where we input the code to blow up the Foundry, and get Wolbrin as an ally. Sorry Barkus, but I need allies. Our next target was Cazador, so we convinced his charmed guards to let us through to the palace, where we truly showcase how broken Scratch's damage can get. We used Sleep, Glyph of Warding, and Perilous Stakes, Haste, and Valar Lufe for 54 damage in 1 turn against the undead butler Goti. After clearing the ballroom of its very weak enemies, we reach level 11 and pick up not only Globe of Invulnerability, but also 1 other spell. This spell is considered to be one of the worst spells in the game because of its sheer chances to not work, but it would trivialize almost every boss on this list. I am of course talking about Flesh to Stone. We descended to Cazador and used Daylight next to him, which dealt damage to him because of sunlight hypersensitivity. And Shadowheart used Hide, so the enemies refused to move. Our goal was to deal with all the other enemies first, but the enemies disengaged combat, and we had to come up with another way to win the battle. Because the daylight was still there, the Scratch Urge used Flesh to Stone while hiding. By that point, Cazador had moved out of the daylight, so he wasn't taking damage from it. I had hoped to take him out without starting combat, but Scratch got spotted. By that point, Cazador had failed 2 of the 3 savings throws to resist the Flesh to Stone spell. Astarion used Plant Growth, and we backed up the stairs. The bats were easy enough for Scratch to deal with, and I cast a Dominate Person on the werewolves, so they would target each other, after Cazador failed his savings throw and became permanently petrified. Now that Cazador was out of the picture, Astarion cast Eye Bite on Chatterteeth to stop him from using Eye Bite also. And 1 by 1, we had Scratch eliminate all of the enemies, while the dominated werewolf attacked Cazador, completely ignoring the 10 bats surrounding him. We eventually finished the fight and let Astarion ascend, mainly for the Misty Escape ability. We escaped through the side exit to avoid the Gur fight, and that is the 3rd boss defeated. With Cazador defeated, our next boss was Viconia, but before that, I headed over to Mystic Carrion. We didn't need to complete his quest for the Torch of Revocation, but he sold the Hood of the Weave, which brought the Scratch Urge's spell save DC to 23. We proceeded near the House of Grief and convinced a man to give us all his gold. This fight was going to be rough, not because of Viconia, but her allies, who all deal an extra 4d8 damage whenever they hit with an attack. We start the fight by Crown of Madnessing one of the Crusaders. We need Viconia to take her turn, so she can use Wayward Heart or some other ability to break her sanctuary. Her minions just spent their turns dashing to get to us, and we Flesh to Stone Viconia. But then, it happens. Her Fidelians have Darkness, which stops all of our crowd control from being effective, given we aren't immune to blindness. The first time, we were able to use Daylight, which dispels the darkness, and stop Shar's troops from getting their damage buff. The Scratch Urge used Grease to block the way, and Stage Fright to have enemies take massive damage on missing their attacks, while Scratch just attacked the closest thing he could. Viconia failed her final save against Flesh to Stone, and we used another Grease to stop anyone from getting up the stairs. On the enemy's turn, they would try to move and fall prone, which just ended their turn. Scratch and the dominated Justiciar whittled away at the enemies, and with the help of Valar Luve's Shriek ability and Perilous Stakes on the Justicar that wasn't dominated, we began to win the fight, pulling out all the stops to win using Timus Spore Grenades, Fairy Fire, and the most crucial part of the fight, a Fear spell on over half the surviving enemies. We dominated the other Crusader after the Sharans killed the first one, and the battle finally turned in our favor. We confused the enemies to fight each other, while Scratch spent his turns either hiding out of fear or biting one of the Fidelians who have very low armor class. Everyone else in combat basically spent their entire turn prone or confused, some of which were afflicted by both. We ran out of spell slots and had to tap into our limited scrolls to continue crowd controlling the dwindling but still formidable enemy count. Scratch eventually finished off the last Fidelian before taking on the excruciating task of biting Viconia to death over the tens of rounds, thanks to Scratch's very low damage, even with Aura of Murder active. On combat round 38, Scratch took out Viconia, and since she was petrified, the cutscene didn't play, allowing Scratch to finish her off for good. This is because if she is not petrified or incapacitated in some way, the cutscene will play and we either have the option to kill Viconia, which technically isn't Scratch, or let her go, which means we don't get any of her loot. We claimed her gear and took the 4th boss off of Scratch's hit list. We also reached level 12, where I had the Scratch urge to take the dual wielder feat to get a second spell save DC increasing staff, bringing it up to 24. This also increased the max arcane ward stacks he could get at a time to 24 as well, meaning a hit of less than 48 damage on Scratch because of warding bond would deal no damage if used. We also gave all the other party members +2 constitution. I needed to get the second netherstone, so I headed over to Worm's Rock to challenge Gortash. Some potions of flying allowed us to scale the fortress very easily. Much like Viconia, Gortash is affected by almost nothing, but with 10 constitution, it just so happens that he can be affected by literally everything, meaning there's no chance of him resisting flesh to stone. He became petrified without using combat after I used it, so I used a minor illusion to lure the guards over to us. On the first turn of combat, I dominated one of the black gauntlets and put an iron console to sleep. Then I snuck the other party members into an advantageous position before I began crowd controlling them. We fully buffed Scratch and have him attack the paralyzed console, dealing over 40 damage in one turn. For some reason, one of the other ones decided to shoot a grenade on the ground and basically kills himself with it. Given the Scratch urge can keep enemies basically stun-locked forever, Scratch and the Black Gauntlet destroyed everything in sight before the Gauntlet tried to cheat the system by attacking the canisters, which blew up, to repeat the savings throw against being dominated. Eventually, the only one left was Gortash, and once again, Scratch got to biting him, since he couldn't do anything on any of his turns. Over many rounds, Scratch bit him over and over again, and because of the Aura of Murder, which cancels out the resistance from flesh to stone, this allowed Scratch to kill Gortash in under 90 rounds. On his corpse was the Netherstone-studded Gauntlet, which also increased the Scratch Urge's spell save DC to an impressive 25, and gave us the second Netherstone we needed to enter the final battle of the game. That's Gortash off of Scratch's hit list. Right after Gortash on the list was Orin. Since I hadn't killed Isobel, Orin would duel me in her Slayer form. With the Amulet of Baal, I entered the Temple of Baal before I had a difficult choice to make. I could cheese the fight with her and all of my allies, but that would mean having to deal with all of her guards and deal with Orin's constant unstoppable boon. The only other option was dueling her, but that would stop any of my allies' buff spells from being able to be cast, and if Scratch dies, it would leave him stuck at 5 health if I ever resummoned him. Ultimately, I decided to duel Orin. I started the duel with Flesh to Stone, and waited until Orin failed all of her savings throws. Then Scratch bit away at Orin, but because she was petrified, she had resistance to all damage, and I couldn't equip the ballast armor because I was a wizard. I could haste Scratch or hold monster Orin, while Scratch just kept biting her and killed her after 70 rounds of combat in an ever-expanding pool of blood. We ultimately refused Baal's blessing for the extra allies and obtained the third Netherstone, but while Orin was trivial, I picked the hardest 2 bosses for last. You might say to yourself that Flesh to Stone is way too powerful of a spell for this challenge. This spell allows every fight to be a win if they fail their savings throw, but the next challenge we would face wouldn't have that as an option, as the next target on the list was Raphael. We proceeded to the Devil's Fee to buy the Cloak of the Weave, bringing us up to full power with an earth-shaking spell save DC of 26, before making a deal with Helsik to bring her the Gauntlets of Hill Giant Strength found in the House of Hope. With a spell save DC this high, almost nothing can resist my spells, and you'll see the effects of that soon enough. Once in the House of Hope, we broke into Raphael's secret vault for the Staff of Spell Power, given it also has Arcane Battery. This essentially gave us 2 free spells. We get the code to dismiss the barrier, and Flesh to Stone Harlep, allowing Scratch to easily kill him. We stealthily freed Hope after getting the hammer, and summoned every single creature I could for pure cannon fodder. Using the power of the Restoration Faucet, we cast every possible buff spell on my allies and summons before heading into the antechamber to confront Raphael. My summons are there to destroy the pillars, because those aren't technically creatures, and thus don't violate the rules. There were so many buff spells that a third of my screen was covered by them. Shadowheart even used her divine intervention for the legendary mace with the healing incense aura. The plan was to put a sleep glyph where Raphael and Corilla would spawn using Glyph of Warding, to hopefully rob them of the first turn in combat. We entered the portal, and Raphael chastised us. Because we helped Yrgir in Act 2, he joins us as well, without an ability check. Once the fight began, the Glyph of Warding went off, sleeping both Raphael and Corilla. We begin to use planar binding on two champions, while Yrgir kills Corilla. Then we found the most overpowered spell in the entire fight. Hope can use an action to banish a creature from her house forever, which kills them without doing any damage. Every single turn, Hope banished a champion while the Scratch Urge used sleep glyphs to rob Raphael of his turns, and Black Hole to group them up. Because of his 26 spell save DC, every enemy spent their turn either seized by planar binding, asleep, or slowed, without being able to resist any of it. On her next turn, after banishing a second champion, Hope used Divine Intervention to give everyone back all of their spell slots, and her next two turns to banish the mind control champions. Meanwhile, the first major problem with this combat was first noticed. Raphael has Inevitable Resolve, which causes any negative status effect on him to last only one turn, which means only sleep glyphs can affect him. Yrgir, however, has lower initiative than me and higher initiative than Raphael, meaning he will attack Raphael, automatically critical hit him since he's sleeping, and wake him up. We paralyze Raphael and perilous stakes him, allowing Yrgir to do some incredible damage alongside one of the remaining champions that was dominated. Once the champions were all gone, that left only Raphael, silenced, affected by perilous stakes, and asleep half the time. We hold monster him, and alongside Yrgir and a weak Guardian of Faith, Scratch decimated Raphael, without even losing any allies, and removing Raphael from the hit list. The final enemy, the Netherbrain, was waiting for us. We descended to the Netherbrain, and make sure to have Astarion drink a Cloud Giant Strength potion before taking the boat there. We failed every check to dominate the brain, except for the last and most important one, which reduces the brain's HP for the battle. We freed Orpheus, and decided to become a Mind Flayer, not just because it's overpowered, it is, because Orpheus in his non-Mind Flayer form has Globe of Invulnerability, a spell we absolutely need. We rallied our allies, chugged invisibility potions to skip every fight but the last one. As far as I know, I became a Mind Flayer for Scratch. The fight on the top of the brain was going to be very hard, so I pre-buffed with everything, and used invisibility potions to try to skip the fight, not realizing that's since been patched out. Once the fight started, we summoned our massive number of allies on the first couple turns in combat, and let them do all the work fighting the Mind Flayers. The Scratch Urge opened the portal into the brain very easily after the Emperor was destroyed, and Orpheus and all of our allies prepared to head in. But I realized not only could Scratch not enter the final fight, but once everyone entered, he would despawn. We placed a Globe of Invulnerability down and re-summoned him. Throughout the game, I had been gathering explosives of all kinds, and I had Minthara place down all of them right next to the brain, along with an Alchemist Fire. Once everyone was safe in the globe, I had Scratch bite the Alchemist Fire to finish off the brain for good. But I still didn't feel like this was a true Scratch-only victory. I reloaded and attempted to beat the brain with Scratch's bites. I used Fierce Perilous Stakes on both Scratch and the brain, Haste on Scratch, Fairy Fire, and Fracture Psyche, as well as every single buff spell I could, which allowed Scratch to beat the life out of the brain with one round left until the game would end. Proving Scratch is not only the best boy in all of Faerun, but also the best fighter in all of Faerun, as the final target on Scratch's hit list was eliminated. If you've enjoyed, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We're trying to reach 1K subscribers, and with your help, we can. YouTube tells me 90% of you guys watching aren't subscribed yet, so concussive smash the subscribe button, will you? Full movie of this series will be out soon. See you later.